Let me ask each of you to make a brief comment about one concluding question, and then I'll ask for final summary statements. And the final question that I would put to each of you is, pick either area that we've talked about, either Nicaragua and Central America or the Middle East, and say in a few sentences what the United States foreign policy in that area should be now. What would you propose? Mr. Perle, may we start with you?
Well, I happen to think that, broadly speaking, American policy in the Middle East has been aimed and continues to be aimed at trying to help bring about a settlement of the principal disputes that plague that part of the world. In particular, the dispute between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors and the PLO. But I think we have chosen the right basis upon which to attempt to do that, which is a change of a fundamental nature in the threat that an irredentist PLO committed to the destruction of Israel would pose. Professor Chomsky says it isn't an issue of security. It is very much an issue of security. It's all very well to sit in Columbus, Ohio, and say it's not an issue of security, but there have been a number of wars already in the Middle East, each one of which potentially threatened the survival of the Jewish population of the State of Israel, and I think the Israelis have a right to insist on security arrangements that have some hope and some promise of stability, and the United States has by and large been right in supporting those same objectives. It is more than a trivial matter when one talks about the legitimacy of one's right to exist, because as Professor Chomsky knows full well, until the legitimacy of that right to exist is acknowledged, any settlement, any political or territorial settlement, will at best be a temporary settlement in the context of the larger effort to destroy the very existence of a Jewish state in Palestine. And I think the United States is quite right not to align itself with pressures to that end.
Thank you. After Professor Chomsky responds, I'm going to ask you to make the opening concluding remark in about 5 minutes.
So that should be sometime around breakfast.
Okay.
By my reckoning.
I'll try to make it in time for a midnight snack.
Briefly, Professor Chomsky.
Well, let me talk about Israeli security, which I think we should be concerned about. Let me repeat that the comments on Israeli security that I was referring to were not my judgments. They were the judgments of the expressed in the cabinet meetings and other planning sessions that have been amply documented in the scholarly literature in Israel in Hebrew. For they did not see the issue of security, and rightly so. Because as former head of military intelligence General Harkabi and others will explain to you and do explain to you, the problem of a Palestinian state is not one of security. A demilitarized Palestinian state, which is what it will be, contained in a hostile Jordanian-Israeli military alliance, will undoubtedly improve the security of Israel. But that's not the whole point. See, in my view, here we probably do differ. It's not just the security of Israel that's at stake. Peace in that region will improve the security of Israel. I think that's pretty likely. And steps towards peace would be a step towards Israeli security. But that's not the only issue. There happen to be Palestinians there. There's an indigenous population. And their security counts every bit as much as the security of the Jewish population. So, all of this talk about you're sitting here and not talking about them, if I were to resort to the same rhetorical technique, I would say, I do not do this is conditional, I would say, well, it's very nice to sit here and talk about the security of the Palestinians in refugee camps. That's not the point. We should be concerned with the security of the Israelis and of the Palestinians, and I think there's an obvious way to maximize, not of course guarantee, that security. With regard to the question of legitimacy, if the failure to recognize the legitimacy of Israel, this new concept in international affairs, if that excludes the PLO, then plainly Israel's excluded from the negotiations as well. because it not only refuses to accept the legitimacy of Palestinian nationalism, it even refuses the lower demand, much lower one, of accepting the request of the PLO for negotiations leading to mutual recognition. In fact, it refuses even to allow the Palestinians to choose their own representatives for eventual negotiations. And it is not only putting these forth as statements, it is acting to implement them. Finally, last comment. Even if we were to accept this innovation in international affairs and demand that the Palestinians not only recognize Israel, which they've already stated long ago they're willing to do, but recognize the legitimacy of their dispossession from their homes, even if we impose this extra and novel burden on them, can anyone seriously believe that such a statement, such a verbal statement, would improve the security of Israel? That's living in a dream world. Security is not based on verbal statements made by some leader under duress. Security is based on arrangements that are created among states and other groups, not on some empty verbiage. Even if they were to produce this statement, it would not contribute one iota to the security of Israel. In fact, it's obvious, and it tells us exactly what the point of those demands is. The point of those demands is to place further roadblocks in the way of a political settlement.